Welcome to Golf and the Good Life, your guide to golf travel across the pond. I'm DJ Jones, joined as always by my good friend Connor Evers, and today we're going to talk about some great road trips that you can take while enjoying your time overseas. But before we get there, Connor, happy Thanksgiving. As this comes out, the holiday is tomorrow. What do you have on tap for the Thanksgiving break?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Deej, and happy Thanksgiving to you as well and to all our listeners. So I appreciate that. And yeah, heading back home to Iowa to spend some time. Thanksgiving, I think, is my favorite holiday. So looking forward to that and some good food, but all's good. And recently, I also traveled to North Carolina to my alma mater, Methodist University, and attended an alumni event. Which was great, and played a couple rounds of golf and had some social events with some alumni. There was almost 70 people there, which was a pretty great turnout. January, usually they have an alumni event there for the PGA show down in Orlando, and they're kind of stretching themselves to do some different things. And it's, good with a lot of the pros in the Northeast or Chicago or what have you, that kind of the off season right now. So it's a good time to kind of get everyone together, but it was in North Carolina and very successful. And met with some PGA professionals that are currently traveling next year or coming up in the future looking to do trips. So it's good networking and chatting with them too. With the holiday season coming up and especially Christmas, it's just the 2025 travel season. And then the initial planning for 2026 just keeps getting a little bit here closer and closer, which is all good. And then with that too, with the calendar moving over to 2025, we're in the midst of planning for the PGA show, which is great, the end of January too. So the off season's always nice, but it's just one thing after another, and each month gets closer and closer to new things. So all good in the off season here and everything at HQ too.
Yeah, I joked with John Baker a few days ago that the off season these days feels like it's about 2 weeks long. And the problem is that it's usually the 2 weeks that we're overseas, in Scotland or Ireland or wherever we are. And so we come back and it's like, boom, it's time to go. The days of the off of having a nice off season through into the spring are long gone. But that's also a very good problem to have. But great stuff about the holiday and so forth. Before we get going too deep into the episode, I wanted to share. So a while back, you mentioned or you suggested the book "Searching in St. Andrews" by Sean Zach. It had been on my nightstand for like months. I finally got it read, and what a great read that is. Kudos to
Mhm.
Sean. It's kind of like when you are watching, say, a tour event and it's at a course that you've played, it just kind of hits different because you know it, you've been there. And reading this book and hearing about the places he went and the people that he met and so forth, people that we know, places that we know, the book just hits different, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. From there, I've moved on to the book God and Guinness. If you care at all about beer and you're headed to Ireland, pick this book up or download it to your Kindle. I had no idea the history or the depth of the history with Guinness in terms of their impact on Dublin and Ireland and really bringing Dublin into or out of some very dark times in the 19th century. Last but not least, got to give a big time shout out to the Golfers Journal. Issue number 30 arrived in my mailbox yesterday. And right on the front cover is our beloved Critch Island. A fantastic photo of Critch Island. And inside there is a fabulous story by Tom Coyne that focuses largely on the sixth hole. I won't give a whole lot of it away, but Tom Coyne is one of these writers that every time I read something of his, I think it's the best thing he's written. And and this is no exception. And again, it hits different because we've been there. We know what it's like to hit that 4 iron into this 150-yard hole and have it stand no chance of getting across the ocean. So some stuff for your reading list, both for you, Connor, and everyone else listening out there.
That's great. Oh my gosh. I know they posted it on Instagram last night. I DM'd it to you. I'm like, dude, look at, I mean, I just, I mean, go back to one of our first episodes when we did Northwest Ireland. I'm looking at this photo. I'm just beaming. Like, I'm so like happy. And it's just one of those places where it takes such a big effort to get there, but it's so worth it. And it's little, not little, it's fairly off the beaten path. I mean, even the mailbox that says, hey, if the golf shop's not open, put your, few euros in and go at it and play. It's just such a special place and something you can't get anywhere else. And yeah, I'm gonna have to read that book about Guinness. Might be a good Christmas gift for my dad, actually. It's not a
There you
bad
go.
idea. So
Borrow it from him. Before
yeah.
we leave off of Critch Island, so, do you remember, is it the third or the fourth hole that's the blind tee shot and we crested the hill and we discovered that our drives were basically long gone in the Atlantic?
Yeah, it was the third. You're right. Third hole.
I think of that hole all the time because I mean the thrill of climbing that hill and you having no idea what's on the other
Yep.
side and realizing we just hit driver and we needed to hit 6 iron.
Yep.
Like it, what a place. And the article
Yeah.
by Tom Coyne really captures it pretty well. And so anyway, if you don't subscribe to the Golfers Journal, you really need to subscribe to the Golfers Journal. Maybe another Christmas gift idea for those of you out there. But back to today's episode. So this one's a little different. It's pretty good life heavy, and it's not a topic that you would really think that would be covered on a golf travel podcast. But look, as we've said so many times, if you go overseas to Scotland and Ireland and you only see the golf courses and you miss the history and the culture and the heritage, and in this case, the scenery of the surrounding area, you've done it wrong. And so Connor and I have, we've done a number of sort of side road trips just randomly during our travels. And really, kind of what sparked this was you just got back from a great trip with your dad. And you did this pretty epic one in Scotland that I actually haven't even heard about until literally right now when we're recording. So we decided, there's a lot to cover in terms of these road trips. And so where did you go or what was the adventure with your dad?
Yeah, so I wanted to do this trip because he hadn't been to Scotland, and I'm like, we want to do a trip together that we both just want to go somewhere. And I was like, all right, I want to bring my clubs, play a little bit of golf. I want you to see the Scottish Highlands. I want you to see the town of Dornoch, but I also want to do something, drive somewhere, do a road trip that I haven't been to that I probably won't have the chance to do. So I'm like, I just want to do something and see it from in all its glory. And I kept seeing these kind of TikToks and everything on social media about Glencoe. And I'm like, dude, we can just drive on the western part down the other side of the A9. So that's what we did. So we drove from Dornoch down to Glencoe. That was essentially the route. And we ended up in Edinburgh. But kind of the road trip that we'll specifically talk about is that. So Inverness to Glencoe. And there's just so many different spots that you can stop on the way down. And I mean, we did it in one day, which was a mistake. We both agreed that we wish we would have split it up. And I would say that's what I would suggest the most from this is doing it's about a 2.5 hour drive from Inverness to Glencoe. I would literally just cut it up in one day. I do about 50% of it the first day and the other half the second. And I would split it up and stop your first night in Fort Augustus, which is kind of on the southern tip of Loch Ness. There's just so many little towns and villages you can stop in. Some are a little touristy, some don't feel that way. But I would drive through, and there's multiple different kind of pull-offs you can take around Loch Ness, a few different castles as well, which is great. And we did also have the chance to stop at Urquhart Castle as well, which is right on the Loch Ness. Beautiful. I actually really enjoyed it. We stopped for a little bit. And as I said, grew up in Iowa. We actually saw a couple from Iowa. They were wearing some Iowa Hawkeye stuff. I'm like, of course, of course. And there's a lot of different like boat tours you can take out of Inverness that'll drive down or boat down, I should say. And then there's a dock that's right at the castle too. So I would also suggest getting there early. We got in 5 minutes before it opened. We breezed through. When we were done from there, the queue to get to the ticket line, I mean, it was probably 50 people. And I told Pops, I'm like, man, if we got here when it looked like this, we would have just left. I mean, it was probably a 30-minute wait just to get a ticket to get in. So get there as early as you possibly can. That's my biggest tip. So I would do that. I would stop at the castle, make your way down, kind of a short day. The following day, I'd wake up early on your day two on this road trip. And I would start the drive down to Glenfinnan, which that's very popular for the Glenfinnan Viaduct. And there's actually a timetable online. You can see when the trains come through. I think there's 4 to 6 trains per day. I looked it up the other day when we were preparing for this. I think the first one's at 10:56. I don't know why that time's ringing in my head, but you can see the train come through from that standpoint. And that viaduct and the train's popular because Chamber of Secrets from Harry Potter, and that's where the inspiration came from the movie there, from that viaduct specifically. So there's a lot of Potter fans in and around there, but it's a little bit off the beaten path. But it's probably 30 minutes out of the way and 30 minutes back. But it's worth it. It's a really pretty area, and I would also wear boots because it's pretty muddy to get closer to the viaduct. So I just had sneakers on and I got pretty muddy. And then back kind of on the main road going more towards Glencoe. I got to tell you, it is one of the most spectacular, beautiful parts of the world I've ever been in. Nothing really compares. It is just the most pure, untouched land I've ever experienced. I mean, you've got deers and wildlife. You've got natural waterfalls coming down. There's a ski resort. The Three Sisters mountain regions. It's literally three mountains that are right there. It's just one of the most beautiful places. There's people fly fishing. It's like, am I really in Scotland? I couldn't believe it. It really reminded me of some of those areas you and I were driving through Northwest Ireland a couple years ago. But I would say the biggest difference is you're pretty in the off beaten path area of Scotland, but the roads are still unbelievably amazing. And I think that's the biggest benefit of it, is just you're not like not scared for your life, but you feel a little bit more comfortable with doing these road trips in Scotland comparatively to some of those off the beaten path areas of Ireland. So I can go into some different tangents of it, but I mean, it's so worth it. So pretty. Yeah.
That whole west side, if you will,
Mhm.
of the Highlands out it's an area that, look, very few golf groups are typically going to get to unless they seek it out, because yes, there's golf over there, but the golf that you're going to play
Mhm.
is generally, it's not there, right?
Yeah.
So it ends up kind of getting missed. But yet I think it might have been just last year we had I was collecting photos from our groups, and one of our groups sent us a photo from the viaduct, and I was like, you know what, that's awesome, great for you guys. I think it was a mom and dad and a son and a daughter-in-law, and they must have just made a day out of it, and took the scenic route to wherever they were headed. But yeah, anytime you can work in something that's truly that off the beaten path, but do it in a way that's not quite as stressful as that drive through Donegal that we that we had a couple of years ago, that's a really great thing. My first one has to be the Ring of Kerry. And look, the Ring of Kerry, there's nothing off the beaten path about the Ring of Kerry. I mean, other than, it's you're still out in Southwest Ireland, but it is, if you think of scenic drives in Ireland, it's kind of the one that most will think of. And look, the west coast of Ireland in general, from like Old Head to Rosapenna, it's just one spectacular stretch of coastline. There is no dull moment, but if you look at the map, it's kind of like Ireland's kind of like this hand with a bunch of fingers sticking out. All of these peninsulas kind of stretch off of the kind of the core part of the island, if you will, and the Ring of Kerry is one of them. And so it means that it's a little different when you're doing these road trips in Ireland. It's a little different than like the Pacific Coast Highway, for example. It's not just one stretch of road. Like you're diverting west for quite a ways before you get to the good stuff, is how it sometimes works out. But the Ring of Kerry, look, you're typically gonna start in Killarney, and you've got, Killarney National Park and Ross Castle and Muckross House and Ladies View, which gets its name from a visit from Queen Victoria way back in the day. Her ladies, all the view, and it's a fantastic view. And then you're going to kind of carry on out to the peninsula. If you're playing golf, you're basically either heading to Waterville, or even Dukes is kind of on the way. So in theory, you could do like half the Ring of Kerry in the morning, maybe play a round of golf around, I don't know, 11, 12 o'clock, if that's a thing at Waterville. Connor would know better on that than I would. But then you would just then carry on after your round. If you got plenty of daylight in the summer months, back to Killarney. But I think it's best done as a day thing. Just do the drive. Don't worry about the clubs because there's so much to see, so many little towns. But if you do Ring of Kerry, number one, as always, the suggestion is go early. All those bus tours and so forth that Connor just talked about at Loch Ness. Well, there's a lot of them that do the Ring of Kerry. I mean, I think there's tours that go out of Dublin and do it as a day
Mhm.
trip and like trek all the way across the country and do the Ring of Kerry and then trek all the way back. But anyway, go early so you can beat some of the traffic. But if you're doing Ring of Kerry and you don't do the Skellig ring portion, you've kind of missed out. And it's basically when you get out to the far end of the ring, there you're going to kind of turn onto a not quite main road anymore and do this loop that's going to take you essentially out to the very tip of the island. And it's called Skellig Ring partially because it looks out towards Skellig Michael, which is this group of islands that if you the latest Star Wars movies, it's where Rhea goes to find Luke. He's like living on this rock. Well, that's Skellig Michael. It's kind of one of those things that it's better to just do it without an itinerary, see where the road takes you. The Ring of Kerry just has so many places to see, the waterfalls and so forth, like Connor just said. But big time tip is to go early.
You're right. And kind of to your point there too, I mean, of just like not really having a full itinerary. I mean, it's just kind of like, hey, you can drive. And even my dad, we're in Scotland. We were driving from Edinburgh up to Dornoch. And I'm like, I saw a sign for St. Andrews. I'm like, Dad, you want to go to St. Andrews? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, all right, let's go. So we just, it's one of those things we didn't have it scheduled. And that is kind of the nice thing of just not having a detailed itinerary of I need to be here, there, and everywhere. It's just you can kind of go. And the nice thing about self-driving is, the road's your oyster. So from that standpoint. So but my next one up is back to Scotland, and I think I'm doing Scotland and Deej is doing Ireland pretty much. But mine is Troon to Machrihanish, and if you're on kind of on a West Coast trip and you're going over to Machrihanish, which is great, I definitely recommend it. What I would also recommend the most if you are driving and what have you is hey, ferry back and play Shishkin, but drive the long and windy road, if you will, over there, just to kind of road trip it. And when you do that, maybe have a day off when you're now have a round of golf, or maybe play super early in the morning and then do it. With golf, you're probably not going to have too much time to do a little bit of touring while you're making that drive. But if you do have the day off, I would recommend that the most. And the main touring site that you're going to drive through would be Loch Lomond and the national park right there. My dad and I drove through it going the other way, so going south instead of you would be going north from Troon up to Machrihanish. But we did kind of the outskirts of it. But Loch Lomond is the first of two national parks, and it was established by the Scottish Parliament back in 2002. And the loch actually has 30 different islands throughout it. And we actually have a tour that some of our groups have done in the past where you actually get on a boat and they bring you around. There's champagne. You can kind of see the different islands throughout. It's just a really pretty day from that standpoint. And believe it or not, there's actually a lot of wildlife throughout the areas. And there's wallabies, and there's actually an island called the Wallaby Island. Pretty cool. You can go there, and that tour actually stops there, so you can hopefully see them through there. But who would have known there's like wildlife and wallabies like that in Scotland, which is great. So, and as I kind of mentioned there, I mean, the best way to see it is via the private cruise that some of our groups have done before. And the other thing I didn't have on my notes, but I wanted to mention too, is the Loch Lomond Distillery, which would be another one you could go and see. So if you are not up for the nature day or what have you, and maybe just want to do something on the way up, or if you are having that early round of golf and wanting to do something, you could do an afternoon tour of the distillery and probably get in pretty late to the Machrihanish for your rounds at Machrihanish Dunes and Mach Golf Club and Dunaverty or what have you you're playing, but just something to do on that kind of that drive up. So.
Well, it's good. It's a good way to break it up, for sure. But yeah, to drive through that whole area and not stop anywhere would be a miss. Well, I'm obviously going back to Ireland, and my next one is one that I discovered and experienced completely by mistake. I had gone to Tralee one morning, and I don't know, I finished up. It was like 10 or 11 o'clock, and I had the whole day ahead of me, and the weather's absolutely gorgeous. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to drive out to Dingle because I'm a huge fan of Murphy's ice cream. The original's in Dingle, and I've been this close a handful of times, and I've never driven out to Dingle, so I'm going to do it. But I didn't set my GPS. I just set out. I'm like, Dingle's this way. I'm going to follow the road signs. I'm going to do it old school. I had the windows down. I got Foo Fighters playing. I mean, I'm just on the open road. Well, I come to this fork in the road, and the sign says Dingle to the left and Dingle to the right. And I had about, I don't know, 2 seconds to make a decision on which way was I going to go. Both lead to the same place. And for some reason, I took the right hand choice. I guess I'm an American and I think right. So I went right. Well, what I didn't realize was that to the left was probably a nice, gentle, easy or easier, path out to Dingle. To the right was what's called the Connor Pass. And I didn't discover this until I was in too deep. The Connor Pass is basically just as it sounds. It is a little lane and a half road, basically, that goes up and over a mountain. And the warning signs that I started seeing should have been a signal should have gone off in my brain of, okay, I got all these warning signs that are like trucks aren't allowed. There were a handful of them, and I'm like, what's the deal with these warning signs? Well, sure enough, the road turns very switchbacky, very steep. I am a nervous wreck. I mean, these cars are getting closer and closer. I'm pulling off into every pull off that I can, letting people go because like I'm going, I don't know how slow I'm going, but I was going slow. And it was a nervous wreck, but
Mm.
it was absolutely gorgeous. I mean, so if you've got the stomach for it in terms of a windy road, up and over mountain, and a cliff off the side, because that's kind of how it is for a fair portion of it. It's only, I think that part's only about 6 or 8 kilometers, but it felt like it may as well have been 60. And so anyway, I come up on this little parking lot and I'm like, okay, I got to take a break and get out, stretch, whatever. And I open the car door and there is rushing water. And I can't see it, but I hear it. And I start looking around. Sure enough, there's a waterfall. And I don't know what inspired me to do it, but I start climbing the more or less a rocky path that's next to this waterfall. And mind you, there was one other car in the parking lot, no sign of any other people. So it's just me. And I don't know what I was thinking because I mean, if I break an ankle, like there's nobody to help me. But anyway, I get to the top of this waterfall and there's a lake up there, completely invisible from the road. And there's a sign that explains that, oh, a landslide ancient times went and dug out this lake and then it left, this hole in the earth that's way up high. Look, I'm from Florida. We don't have lakes in the air here. So I had
Yeah.
never seen anything like it. But anyway, there's this couple, roughly my age, they're struggling to take a selfie of this lake. So I offer to take a picture. I'm like, hey, I take their picture. I hear an American accent, and as you do when you're overseas, I ask, "Where are you from?" Orlando. Now, what are the odds? Two people in this random mountainside lake that you can't see from the road that I don't know if they got there on purpose, but I didn't get there on purpose, and we are both from the same town. Like this, it made no sense. And it was just like, okay, this is awesome. Like this is just travel. This is just the benefit of just getting off the beaten path. And but then eventually I worked up the nerve. I got back in the car and I continued to Dingle. If you make it to Dingle, you got to stop, of course, at Murphy's Ice Cream. There's a fantastic coffee shop called Bean in Dingle. The cinnamon roll was life changing. I don't remember the coffee, but the cinnamon roll was fantastic. But again, just like the Ring of Kerry, if you get to Dingle and then turn around, you've missed out because once you get to the end, there's the Slea Drive, which is a essentially another circle extension, if you will, of the ride out to Dingle that is absolutely gorgeous. So, I mean, if you've got a sunny day, make the ride, do the Conor Pass or don't do the Conor Pass. I'm not gonna give you a suggestion either way. It is worth it if you've got the stomach for it. But then get out to the Sleehead and just kind of marvel at the ocean, and then maybe maybe don't take the Conor Pass back if you're headed back to Tralee or to town or whatever. But yeah, I mean, you talk about a happy accident. One of the reasons I wanted to do this episode about road trips is I just feel like on these road trips are when these happy accidents happen.
Yep. It's so true. It's so true. like even our road trip, I mean, it's nothing comparatively to you of meeting these people, not only from the States to Florida to Orlando, but us seeing two people from Iowa that grew up hour and 15 minutes from our, where we grew. It's just, it's funny how that works to that standpoint. But
And in the
yeah.
case of the Connor Pass one, I mean,
Hmm.
what I think just struck me so much about it was that this we weren't at Temple Bar in Dublin
Yeah.
where you
Yeah.
expect to run into people from Florida. Like this, we were in the middle of nowhere, and I mean, just what are the odds? But anyway, get in the car and or get on the road, I should say.
Sure.
You won't regret it.
Yeah, yeah. So my next one up and also back to Scotland is the drive and road trip, if you want to call it, from Dornick to John O'Groats. So we've had a few groups, I think maybe a couple that have done this in the past. I mean, it's a little bit of a drive. I mean, it's a 4 hour drive, give or take, from Edinburgh to Dornick. Now, from Dornick up to John O'Groats, where you're probably playing golf in and around Dornick, it's another give or take 2 hours. But John O'Groats is essentially the furthest north you can go in mainland Scotland. So it's a really pretty drive, continues at the A9. It's where the A9 essentially stops. A9 is the longest road in Scotland. But this is kind of where the North Coast 500, it's the 500 miles. It's technically 516 miles, but for marketing purposes, it's the North Coast 500. But it's a road that essentially circumnavigates around Scotland. So it goes through kind of those areas that I was talking about through the western side of Scotland, where it's a little bit more barren and what have you. You get to see the different coastlines and stuff. And when you're up there, and even where I was, you're going to see a lot of folks that are camping, tent camping. But the big thing a lot of people like to do is they fly into Inverness and start it, and they will rent a camper van. So I mean, it's pretty cool. I mean, it's a little, you're like, where am I right now, from the scenery, but also just like the folks that are up there. It's a little bit different, but it's a pretty cool spot. And throwing in a little bit of golf up there. So there's town of Wick, which is pretty much right off the A9, kind of that right before you get up to John O'Groats. There's a golf course, Wick Golf Club, and John Sutherland, actually the secretary at Dornick, redesigned that course, which is great. And I didn't never heard of this course called Ray. It's spelled Reay, but pronounced Ray. The gentleman that I was paired up with, Brora, like about a month ago or so, told me about this place, and it's, I would say, halfway between Wick and then the next one, which would be Durness Golf Club, but it's right up there, right in the middle of it. And as I mentioned, Durness, give them a follow on Instagram. DJ and I were just talking about that before the podcast. They have some great content, but also a really sweet logo, I may have to add. But it is a 9-hole course, and you can play it twice, like a lot of the other 9-hole courses overseas. They just have different tee boxes for that too. But a little bit of golf up there, I just have to add. But I mean, if you're playing those three or one of the three, I mean, that's pretty special because you're making a pretty big effort to go up there and just pure links golf up from that standpoint. But do that road trip. You can go the furthest north, and from mainland Scotland as well. There's a few more islands that are a little more north technically, but on mainland Scotland, you got John O'Groats. So make the drive. It's pretty special.
I want to get up there. And it's one of those things
Yeah.
that every time I go to the Highlands, I say, you know what? I'm going to take a day. I'm going to
Mm,
go up there. I'm going to stay overnight at an Airbnb or something. And then I come back to Dornick.
yeah.
And then I just don't end up doing it. And I regret it every time. But
Mhm.
Durness, it strikes me as Critch Island in Scotland,
Yeah.
from what I see on Instagram. But doing that North Coast 500 is kind of big on my list. It actually, along that same route from like Wick over to Durness, there's a Castle May. Queen Elizabeth's mom, the Queen Mother, lived there later in her life, and it was featured in The Crown. If you watched that on Netflix, it made it into a couple episodes. But yeah, I mean, it's that North Coast 500 has been a fantastic marketing scheme that they came up with, because I mean, it has definitely drawn a lot of people to a part of Scotland that most would not think to go.
Yeah. And even when I was over, I mean, we did this trip through Glencoe and then down to Edinburgh. And then the following day, I met with one of the sales managers. I stayed at the Balmoral with my dad, and I was talking to her, and her name's Emma. And I was like, Emma, where are you from? Edinburgh? She's like, no, I'm actually from Wick. That's where I grew up. I'm like, no way. She was like, oh yeah, I've done the North Coast 500. She's like, actually, it's 516, but it was really funny. I'm like, what in the world? Like, I was just up there. It's like it's it's off the beaten path. It's miles and hours drives away, but people have done it before, and some people will take a month and just drive it, or get in a camper van, as I mentioned, and just go up and truly experience it. So it's pretty
Sure.
cool.
Yeah, and you're right. We have had a couple groups. One of our group photos, I think from back in it might have been 2022 or 2023, is a group of gents standing at there's a signpost in Jono groups that's like an Instagram spot. I don't know if that's what took them there, but they
Yeah.
they they did take a photo at the signpost. But that's really cool. On my end, to just kind of sum up, Ireland. It's talking about how many scenic drives there are. And I mean, the West Coast is essentially one long scenic drive. Some honorable mentions that you got to throw into the mix would have to be the Burren. I actually think we talked about this on the Southwest Ireland episode. The Burren is this amazing, like, volcanic glacial landscape. I don't even know how to describe it. It's something, it looks very lunar, but there's a nice circle that you can do essentially from Lahinch that also then kind of ends at the cliffs of Moher. So you can get a couple great spots out of that. Another is Loop Head. Loop Head, if you're down in Doonbeg, is a cool road trip. There's a great stretch of cliffs on the way out to the Loop Head Lighthouse, and then this thing called the Bridges of Ross, which is like these natural stone bridges that kind of connect these little fingers of land. That's how I would describe it. It's hard to describe. You pull up a picture if you need it. But Loophead was another one of those small world things. I stopped at this art gallery one time. Actually, the only time I've made the drive. It was raining. I was hungry. Google Maps had lied to me again in terms of how long it was going to take to get out there. And I passed this art gallery, and the sign out front said coffee shop and cafe. And I kept driving for about 200 or 300 feet and then was like, I'm hungry. And I put the car in reverse right in the middle of the road. It wasn't like anybody was coming, and go in. And I had this fantastic piece of chocolate cake and coffee. And then as I'm checking out, the lady says, are you here to play golf? And I'm like, well, what gave it away? Like my accent, the golf shirt, or the quarter zip? And I didn't say that, but I mean, that's kind of, I'm like, yeah. And I kind of made some small talk, and she says, well, my father is a sculptor, and he made the bronze statue of Payne Stewart down at Waterville, and my brother made the statue of the goat at Lahinch. And she had this great album of all these photos of these statues being made. And it was like those two things, I've seen them a million times, but seeing them in these photos more or less being created was a very neat experience. And one, again, that if I hadn't stopped the car, put it in reverse and backed up, I would have totally missed. And so it just goes back to that, road less traveled thing. And then last is just, you gotta go to Northwest Ireland, and you just have to get lost like you and I did many times. That drive we did from Narn and Portneuf to Critch Island to Rossapena,
Mm.
which we somehow did in a day. I don't know. What were we
Yeah.
thinking? But
I
anyway,
don't
we
know.
did it in a day. Just unbelievable scenery. And, and I know at one point your dad's like, are we lost? I'm like, no, I think this is right. And, who
Yeah.
knows, but we made it. But some of those roads, I mean, they were a cart path, and but they got us there. But just the scenery was just unbelievable. So yeah, if you want a road trip, just go get lost in Northwest Ireland. You definitely won't regret that. But wrapping up, Connor, anything to add before we call this one done?
No, I mean, I think we mentioned a few times, just, I mean, that is just the benefit of, I mean, you can hire a driver host and do this stuff, but I mean, the nice benefit of just driving yourself is you can do this stuff. You can just, like I said, get lost, put the car in reverse, see the countries. And yeah, like you said, golf is what you go for. But this past trip, I mean, I had every opportunity to play a lot more golf, but it was just so enlightening and just so cool to go to Scotland, and a place that I probably won't be able to go back, or maybe someday, but just not as common, just because there's not as much golf in that area. But go see the countries, even leave the clubs at home, go take a fishing trip. And that's what I wanted to do. I'm like, Dad, we should have went fishing. So it's just so pretty. But go get lost, and you won't regret it. That's kind of my last thoughts.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, some of these could absolutely be done with a driver host. Talk to them,
Yeah.
share your goals, tell them, "Hey, I want to take a day trip
Hmm.
that's kind of a road trip." Some
Yep.
of them though probably can't. And so
Yes.
this is it would be if you're on a self-drive type setup, but look, there's plenty of options. No, whichever one you're going to. If you're with a driver, again, tell them, share that goal with them. Hey, we want to take a road trip. They'll make something happen for you.
Oh
But
yeah.
you've
Oh yeah.
got no shortage of options. But as always, we'll link to some things in the show notes. I actually wrote a couple blogs about a couple of these road trips here recently, so we'll throw those in there as well. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, DM us on social media or shoot us an email, golf@haversham.com. Thanks as always for tuning in. We will be back again soon with another episode, but until then, we wish you plenty of golf at its finest and life at its best.